Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast, episode 79. And today we have another special guest, of course, as always. But let me just tell you right away, if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, make sure you head over to YouTube, where you can not only listen to our sultry voices, but get the full visual experience in full Technicolor as well. Now, again, episode 79. Today's guest is the internationally acclaimed, award-winning National Geographic and Life magazine photographer, educator, author, Nikon ambassador, and by far one of the nicest people in the photography business, a living legend. Give it up for Mr. JOE McNALLY. Joe, how are you?
Hey, Joe.
Good. How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's taken a little while in the planning for various reasons, but we're so glad we finally managed to get you on.
No, it's a pleasure to be talking with both of you. Yes, it was a little bit of a, convoluted approach. We all had so many things going on, but that's kind of the way of the world right now.
Yeah, it's been a tricky time, I think, for everyone. Predominantly because of the pandemic, and then I don't know what it's like over where you are on the East Coast, but certainly over here in the UK, things have started to kind of open up again, which has brought with it its own problems and so on. But how has the whole pandemic been for you?
Horrible, as it was for everyone. But, given the life I've led, which has been largely on airplanes, the small personal silver lining for me was that all of a sudden I was home, and so there were many things that needed attention that I had not really paid attention to because of our studio's pace and the fact that I was gone a great deal. So, yes, it was damaging and awful, and lots of controversy surrounding it in our country. Nobody can seem to get, their heads on straight about it, or at least some folks are contentious about the whole thing and trying to bounce back from this. So that's a bumpy road indeed. Hoping that we can smooth the path out, at some point, and beyond that. Professionally, we're getting back to work. I've been traveling more, shooting more. That's all good stuff. But the hardcore aspects of the pandemic were difficult to weather, but the positive aspects were that I was home and I was able to do things around here, straighten out archive, kind of plan for the future, time home where my wife and I were experimenting in the kitchen and put on about 10 pounds. And things like that were fun. Wrote a new book, and again, just tried to breathe a bit for the first time in a long time, where I knew I did not have to get on an airplane, tomorrow.
I'm dying to know, Joe, what was the most experimental thing you tried in the kitchen?
For me, kind of experimental was I started gardening, which I'd never done before. And this sounds very mundane, of course, but for me, it was kind of revelatory. I grew tomatoes and basil and beets and things like that out on the deck. And then we instituted pizza night. So I got a couple of pizza stones, and Annie and I started creating our own pizzas on like Friday night would be our have a glass of wine and make some pizza and try to forget about the pandemic kind of, evening. Yeah. So
can I come round to yours on Friday nights?
Absolutely. Always welcome here.
It sounds like I sense the similarities because Nick and myself also have, we also start a pizza night, which basically usually happens after every podcast recording.
Okay. All right. That's right. Yeah. It's getting close to dinner time for you guys, so yeah. I've been a professional photographer for 40 years, so my archives are pretty extensive. A lot of those older archives, and all of them really, are film-based. So I started winnowing through that. We probably threw out, at this point, probably several hundred pounds of transparencies.
Wow.
Dating back to the 1970s. So, and also things, the value of a photographer's archive. Things were not positive economically for photographers during the pandemic, but one thing that was helpful to us was that I spent time with both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. in the late 80s. And those are historical takes now. It's not current material.
Yeah.
But I shot Trump for a cover of Newsweek, and I shot a lead story for People magazine on Joe Biden. And so those pictures were in demand.
So just a question there. Who was easier to work with, Trump or Biden?
Joe Biden is a decent man and affable to a fault. We got along really well. And he still has the picture I made of him. That was the lead photograph. He uses it now in his Instagrams. He has it framed right behind the Resolute desk.
Oh.
And he recently did an Instagram where he's holding that framed picture. It's just a simple shot, available light picture of him on Amtrak. But he is known, his nickname is Amtrak Joe, because he would take the Amtrak every day into Washington as a senator during his senatorial career, and because he lived in Wilmington, which is a pretty short throw on Amtrak. So he got the nickname Amtrak Joe.
Fantastic. So I don't know if I really want to know, but what was it like working with Donald Trump?
It was
challenging.
Let me choose my words. Actually, to me, he just kind of treated me like a piece of equipment.
Right.
I was just this guy with a camera, and he did what I asked him to do. His ego is bottomless, so he's perfect fodder for the camera. Never said no. Was thoroughly thrilled at that point to be heading for the cover of Newsweek, which he was on the cover. One of the worst cover photographs I ever shot. Newsweek was happy with it. I was like, because he came out of a conference room. I was all set up in another room, and he came out of a conference and he looked at me and goes, "I've got 3 minutes. Let's shoot this cover."
Wow.
Okay. All right. You want to be like that? Go ahead and be like that. I'll shoot you for 3 minutes, and we'll get this done. So, yeah, It was an interesting and laborious week. I was pretty exhausted at the end of it.
You must literally have thousands of stories like that throughout your career.
Well, the wonderful thing about being a photographer is that you do get to encounter a lot of life, and you have an inside track in a certain way because you are associated with a publication, you have a camera, you are there to document, record, etc. And so oftentimes people allow you access to certain areas of their lives or their businesses or whatever it might be because they are participating in this story. So you get a bit of an insider look at lots of different things. And the wonderful thing is you are oftentimes sent to photograph people because they are so excellent at what they do. Be it a dancer or an actor, actress, author, scientist. They are noteworthy. They are doing excellent work. They are a cultural phenomena. They are whatever they might be. You're sent to photograph. So you are a witness to excellence, which is wonderful.
There's one photo of yours that when I told my daughter that you'd shot that particular photo, my youngest daughter is 10, and she's a big Muppets fan, by the way. And I know that you shot the Muppets in Mourning after Jim Henson's death back in the early 90s, wasn't it?
80s.
Oh, 80s, yeah.
It was in the it was in the 80s.
And I remember when I told my daughter who our next guest would be, and I said, he shot this photo. She goes, so she could see the recognition in her face because she's like I said, she's a big Muppets fan. So am I, incidentally.
Yes, my oldest daughter took that Life magazine into show and tell. She was kindergarten-ish, one first grade, something like that, and so I was pretty cool there for a while because she brought that in and said, my daddy knows Kermit.
Yeah. Awesome. I remember when my daughter was in preschool and she did show and tell there as well, and the night before she had to do this show and tell thing, I was giving her a bath, and she asked me like why things why things would drop into the bathwater. And I said, well, it's a thing called gravity. It's a thing. Gravity. We're on a planet, and when you drop something, it always falls on the ground. So that's how I explained it to a 5-year-old or something at the time. And we call that gravity. And then the next day, I picked her up from preschool, and the teacher came up to me and she goes, "That was a very interesting show and tell." I'm like, "Really? What did she do?" She goes like, "Well, she just dropped her fluffy toy and said, and that is gravity."
Good for her. Good for her, the soul of brevity.
Yeah, exactly. So, Joe,
superb.
Take us back to when your photographic career first started. I take it you really started in a time when not only film was the thing, but also in a time when newspapers and magazine publications were on a completely different level from the world of publications today. What was that like at that time?
It was thrilling and rough around the edges and very ramshackle, kind of endeavor compared to the very sleekly technology. What am I trying to say here? The very sleek technology of today, which can facilitate immediate delivery. I mean, autofocus did not exist. The menus that we associate with the cameras now did not exist. Your basic controls were, shutter speed and f-stop. And you had film in the camera, 36 exposures. You were manually focusing. You had to develop strategies around that. So you would be at an Olympics shooting film, and you'd have to bang through 25 frames and then be maybe another loop around the track for the runners. And do I have enough time to rewind and put a new cassette in, or do I hold tight and just use the last 10 or 12 frame? I mean, you had strategies that were associated with film work. The upper level of an ISO was, in the neighborhood of 1600, and even then you'd run that through a Versamet at the newspaper or the wire service, and it would have grain that you could drive a truck through. But there was forgiveness too. At the New York Daily News, the dot screen was so rough that you could shoot a picture that was 5 feet back focused and it looked fine in the paper. So it was very, wonderfully kind of haphazard, at that time. But it was also intense and very passionate because newspapers were very much alive. Magazines were a huge part of the cultural landscape. The newsstands at the airports were chock-a-block with magazines that were kind of essential, I would have Time, Newsweek every week, Life every month, National Geographic. These were essential publications. Not to say that news and all of that is not essential anymore, which is just delivered differently.
Is there something that you miss from those days compared to how things have evolved to today?
I don't miss film, to be honest. I really don't miss film. I imagine if I ever get to a point where, I have some hobby time, maybe I still have some older panorama film cameras I might mess around with. But in terms of the urgency and immediacy and the quality now, the digital is a clear winner. So I would not go back to film if I had the choice. And I would, though, I do miss ink on paper. I do like the permanence of a magazine and the fact that we are driven by clicks now, and the clicks are very, very fast. I think that's a tough thing for young photographers, because young photographers are coming along trying to establish an audience, and they can do that through social media. That is definitely a path. But the permanence of their work, when you put something out there, people are clicking. Oh, they like that. They click and click and click. Okay, it flies really fast. But when I would shoot a cover of National Geographic, for instance, certainly within the industry, that had permanence. That was on the newsstand for a month. People would discuss it. There was a reverberation that is harder, I think, to achieve now, if you get my drift there. It's because of the pace of digital has really overtaken all of us. And it's hard to be contemplative or really reflect on a story if you are, sort of madcap clicking through lots of sites, which we oftentimes tend to do. I'm guilty of it myself. I start my morning and I'm, on the New York Times and a variety of news sites just to see what's going on. And it's all very quick and very cursory.
Yeah. Kay and I both grew up in the digital world. We didn't really have any, sort of experience on film cameras. But, you talking about publications there and the permanence, if you like. The way I kind of look at magazines like that, and I can't remember the last time I actually bought a magazine, right? It's all online. But there's something very intentional about picking up a magazine and going through it and coming across a photo that might be there, and you intentionally look at that photo and you'll take more time about it. I was talking about this with someone else, not yesterday or the day before, but in relation to music and CDs or vinyl, that you intentionally put an album on to sit there and listen to it. Whereas today with streaming services, you don't get that. You jump from one song to another band to this, which is great, but I love the intentionality of something. And I have to say, I miss that kind of thing and picking up magazines each week and whatever it might be. So, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from on that. I really do.
Yeah, it is. Intention it's a good way to put it. And you also if you were intrigued by a set of photographs or a story, you had to buy the magazine. Mm-hmm. Which meant you really had intentions, and this was intriguing enough, and that was oftentimes my job as a photographer, or always my job, really, because I got thrown stories at the National Geographic oftentimes that people weren't necessarily inclined to be interested in, like giant telescopes. I mean, unless you're an avid astronomer, giant telescopes isn't on the tip of your tongue. So my job would be to go out there and make pictures that would get somebody to stop and say, oh, and then get involved in the story.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's funny you say that about, if you come across a set of pictures you'd have to buy the magazine. I've done some sort of training type stuff in the past, and there's something, if you think about a training video that you produce, if you give it away for free, that's one thing. People will go, oh, that's great, thank you very much, that's brilliant. You could give the exact same copy video away, same thing, for, let's just for argument's sake, a $5 or a $10 or whatever it might be, and they will be so much more invested in learning what's within that video because they've parted with something. They've given something for that. And I just see it the same way with magazines like that. You're just more invested in what that magazine's trying to show you or tell you.
Well, I think, very often, I remember buying magazines because I love the physicality of it too. And I used to buy magazines solely based on the front cover. Right. National Geographic is a really good example. Newsweek is a good example. Life magazine, stuff like that. If that had a great cover picture, I would immediately be, intrigued by it. And then, of course, you'd have to buy the magazine, to find out more. And that was the whole thing. And it's always interesting that, nowadays we still talk about great cover photos.
Sure. Yeah. Banner pictures now have taken the place of covers, trying to get you involved in a website or whatever it might be. Photographers, trying to establish, driving attention to their sites, the choice of the landing page, et cetera, is also very crucial. It's kind of the cover photograph for your business, to try to intrigue people and pull them in. So it is, I don't say this with regret because it is what it is. I have a very good friend, brilliant photographer named Greg Heisler, who was really changed the landscape of magazine photography in relationship to color. He was so strong. He shot more time covers, for instance, than any photographer walking the planet. And he's an educator now. And he looked at me at one point, he goes, Joe, this was going to happen whether we liked it or not. So it becomes incumbent on you as a photographer to roll with the punch, adapt to the technology, and see where the strengths of this particular technology might be in relationship to your work or your career, or in the direction you choose to go in the future.
Did you have an inkling that these changes were going to happen? Like at the time when that switch between, from sort of analog film photography to digital happened, was the writing on the wall back then, or?
Well, a lot of news organizations got involved in digital, pretty much right away because of speed of delivery. And I was not so much part of the news, immediacy of the news at that point. When digital, let's call it 2000, digital started to really, the drumbeat got loud. And I was not shooting news. I was not shooting anymore for magazines or wire services that were driven by the weekly events. I was shooting more features for Life or Geographic, longer term types of things. But I could see it coming. In a funny way, I lived through a certain amount of digital backlash. The editors of Life came to me and said, we want you to create an incredibly complex photograph. We had, in the monthly issue, we had 4-page gatefolds as a monthly feature. 4 gatefolds that shows the world that we still do real photography, film photography. We don't dabble in that nasty digital stuff. We're not using the computer. This is real. We want you to, and we want to show how it can be done on a highly complex level. So I shot Vanessa Williams, and I guess it was 13, maybe 12 or 13 changes that she undertook when she was on stage on Broadway in Kiss of the Spider Woman. And I shot it at Silver Cup Studios in Queens on a soundstage. And I shot 8x10. And I used a millimetric gate over the sidearm so that when she would appear on stage, you would only expose this narrow strip of the 8x10 sheet. And I would do like 6 of these on one 8x10. And then the remaining 6 would be on another set. And then in the gutter, they would put those 2 pieces of 8x10 film together and present it to the magazine without any retouching. But if you made a single mistake, you would ruin a whole sheet of 8x10. And it worked out. I mean, it's an interesting photograph, to be sure. And Vanessa was a complete trooper. What an amazing pro. She really hit her marks. So exhausting. And then she went out and she went on Broadway that night. Oh my God. So there was this bit of a digital backlash, like heck with this digital stuff, but you couldn't hold it back. I shot the first all digital story in the history of the National Geographic, and that's been incorporated into the Library of Congress here in the United States because they view it as a watershed in the visual history of the magazine. So what are you going to do? Life goes forward.
I was just going to say, I mean, by now, I'm pretty sure the sort of advantages of digital photography have sort of, revealed themselves, over the years, and the way the technology has progressed has made at least my life a lot easier.
Sure. No 2 ways about it. And digital technology, the files, and also, the camera excellence. It's not just the digital aspects of the chip. It's also lenses have been improved, speed, of the glass and the fine tuning of all of this digital technology has resulted in files that Kodachrome, just wouldn't be able to approach in terms of quality.
Okay, when we were at the photography show here in the UK a few weeks ago, we're talking with Canon, and do you remember, was it 100 to 300 new lens that they were bringing out, Cave?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's 100 to 300. It may even be 1 to 4. I can't remember now. But we picked it up and we said, "Is this a model?" It felt like there was no glass in it, and it was also
it was an f8 lens, wasn't it?
I think it was f8. Yeah,
yeah, which was very bizarre. And
it was just like this. You just lift it with your little finger. The thing was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. But yeah, so my point is that. Technology is moving on, just with lenses as well. It's just absolutely relentless right now.
Definitely true. But again, I just came off the Tokyo Olympics, and I was shooting pictures at ISO 8000.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't even a real number in terms of ISO when I was shooting film. And in fact, it wasn't referred to as ISO; it was referred to as ASA.
And I tell you how I remember this. It's because I found some really old film cameras in the attic, and it's where the ISO dial was. It had an ASA dial.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no. When I was shooting Kodachrome, for Geographic, I had ISO 25 and ISO 64 most of the time. Then Kodak came out with a Kodachrome 200, which is a film I liked very much. And oh my God, Kodachrome 200, so much speed. That was amazing. It's the math has changed for sure, and in a good way. In a good way. I'm not being nostalgic here. I'm not saying, back in my day, when did no, I could care less. I mean, digital facilitates us as photographers. It enlarges our possibilities, enlarges our imagination, enlarges what we can do more on our own. Without a huge crew and tons of lighting and grip and this and that. I mean, it was I think a revelatory thing for all photographers that they could be, effectively kind of a one-person band in many ways. Shoot it, retouch it, deliver it.
Yeah, that must have been quite different. When you first started, because I'm guessing in the sort of press game, you would basically shoot the images and then deliver the rolls. They would go to the lab, and everything after that would be taken out of your hands. Whilst now it's more of a thing of shooting, editing, retouching, delivering. It's sort of all now a one-man band type of a scenario.
Sure. I mean, yeah, the ethic of working for magazines oftentimes was shoot it and ship it. That's why I'm a little bit easy about in digital. There's lots of concerns. 1 card slot, 2 card slots, backing things up. And we're very thorough about that. And I'm very precious about the digital stuff that we shoot. But if you want anxiety, take 300 rolls of Kodachrome that you've just shot in India, as I did once for the National Geographic, and put them into a FedEx box in Mumbai and ship it to Washington. And then wait for 3 days to realize whether it's arrived or not. And in that 3 days, you had no idea that all of your work, for which there was no backup for that previous month, was safe. So that's anxiety, Backing up cards, multiple hard drives, easier. A little easier on the nerves.
Yeah.
Did you have any? Well, I'm sure it'll be a sore memory if you did. But did you have any of those go missing?
I had one very unfortunate instance wasn't a shipment. I've lost gear. I've lost lenses in shipping and things like that, But I had one instance at the Time Inc. lab where my entire take was stolen out of the lab. And I had spent a week with Jesse Jackson in his first run for the presidency. And I really battered the Secret Service to allow me to spend the night with Reverend Jackson. He was, at that point in his campaign, he was staying in the homes of poor people, as he put it, economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. He would go in, instead of staying at a fancy hotel, he would stay at somebody's house. And I just banged on Secret Service to let me stay at a house at some point. And so they allowed me to do that. And I stayed fully clothed all night long. I was downstairs. I slept in a chair, but I was right there with Reverend Jackson when he was just ready to go to sleep. He was taking off his shoes, and he looked at me and he was like, "Man, aren't you tired of taking pictures?" He was exhausted. And I made a couple of very significant photographs of it in that first campaign. And 60 rolls maybe of black and white disappeared out of that Time Inc. lab. And that was hard. That was hard because I'd love to have a few of those frames back. Really would. But thankfully, knock on wood, shipping to the Geographic was pretty airtight, and they had a place in the magazine called Film Review. So you would ship 200, 300 rolls of Kodachrome. It would get processed, come into a place called Film Review. And those reviewers would eyeball very quickly every single frame that you shot. Because if you were in the field for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and one of your film plates was scratching, you would not know that. So they would immediately check your film for technical malfunctions, lens, maybe diaphragm problems, whatever it might be. And then they would reorder all of your Kodachromes and organize them vertical and horizontals and do a black stripe along them. So the editor would then take the whole stack and put black stripe down into a thing called the Garrett box, which was a viewing screen that all the editors had. It was developed by Bill Garrett, who was the editor of the National Geographic. And so it was a Kodak carousel basically grafted onto a projection box. And so it would make it easier for the editor when they would get a tub of film that might be 200 rolls big. They would just look at the black stripe, dump it in, start hitting the button. So everything was maximized at that point for speed of viewing of Kodachrome slides.
That's unreal. I'd love to see that. It's a bit of gear that people like Kay and myself just have not seen. I'd love to see that. What a unique way of doing it.
It was standard issue at the Geographic. Yeah. The whole place was geared up. Basically, it was built on the idea of shooting Kodachrome.
Phenomenal. Now, you mentioned a little while ago that you've come back from shooting the Tokyo Olympics. What was that like?
It was odd and wonderful and stressful, all those things. I mean, shooting Olympics is always hard work. You just, it's like jumping out of the airplane, there's no going back, so you're looking at, when you get there, the preamble days, final, you're looking at 18 straight days with no let up, 20 hours a day. Cool. And, and then constantly planning, et cetera, thinking, leapfrogging yourself mentally to try to anticipate what you're going to do next, et cetera, planning your days out, all of that. It was odd because there were no fans in the stands at Tokyo. But it was also wonderful because the athletes performed, as they always do, magnificently. And they lift us all up because their endeavors are so just astonishing. And so it's always an honor to be able to witness that, again, witness the excellence. And it was, I'm glad I did it. There was a lot of controversy about the games beforehand, but the Japanese people, as the volunteers, staff, everyone, they just rallied. And they pulled it off. They really pulled it off. Yeah. And my hat's off to them. They did a great job.
With such a large event like the Olympics, are you going there with the intention of trying to shoot, for want of a better phrase, everything, or do you have a set scope that you're going there to shoot, whether that's a particular event or a particular side to the games that isn't perhaps the athletics, let's say?
Good question. When I did 2016 in Rio, I had worked out with my editor. I was shooting for Sports Illustrated. And I worked out with my editor that I would do, in the initial going of the Olympics, I would do kind of a portrait of Rio. And so I didn't go to any of the events hardly in the first few days of the Olympics. I spent my time in the neighborhoods and the favelas of Rio, and made arrangements to get in there and gain access. And I had a fixer and all of that. And, but immediately prior to the games, that particular editor got fired. And so no one had any kind of tether to that sort of a project. So I think, the editors back in New York were like, what's he doing? This isn't Michael Phelps. This is a bar in Rio, send him, to the sports. So I dropped off of my Rio beat and I engaged with the games. And, I had an assigning editor at that point, sending me here and there. for Tokyo, it was different. I was shooting with Zuma Press, which is a small kind of a boutique agency that services press concerns worldwide, and they gave me kind of a ambassador without portfolio type of an agreement. I could go and shoot anything I wanted, and so I tried some new sports, and then I also tried some tried and true stuff, gymnastics and track and field, or as it's called at the Olympics, it's called athletics. But the gymnastics were fraught with drama, because of Simone Biles. So I was glad I was there for both of her big nights. And then I do enjoy track and field because there's tremendous variety to track and field. There's things going on simultaneously, which is great. So again, being a one-person band at that point, shooting, editing, delivering, I could try to strategize. So I would go oftentimes to athletics. I would have an 800, and then I would have a 120 to 400 millimeter lens on the Nikon system. I was shooting D6s. And so I could find a position, and with the 800, I could reach someplace, an event that was happening across the field or something like in the inner field events. I had no access to be close to the actual event in the infield. Those were highly restricted positions. Sure. Again, even more so than normal because of COVID. So like at boxing, I think there was only one ringside photographer, whereas there's normally 10 or 12. So I tried to strategize so that I could cover the high jump at the same time, cover the finish of a 400 meter run, something like that.
You mentioned there you did perhaps a couple of different sports that you hadn't done before. What were they? How did you find those? Would you do them again?
Sure, absolutely. I shot the surfboard competition,
wow.
which was great, and I shot the skateboard competition. I wanted to say rollerboard, but it's not rollerboard; it's skateboarding, which was a brand new gold medal sport, and it was wonderful to shoot that because they're kids, really. I mean, they're wonderfully talented, super young. Vibrant, joyous, and that was definitely fun to shoot that. And let's see, beach volleyball was something I don't cover hardly ever, and I think the last time I had shot that was maybe Sydney, back in Sydney. So yeah, I tried to mix and match some new kinds of sports which I was really unfamiliar with again some tried true stuff. I always try to shoot wrestling. Greco-Roman wrestling is always great to shoot because the bodies make such powerful shapes, and I try to shoot the lighter weight wrestlers because their strength to body weight ratio is so powerful that they can really throw each other around. The real big guys, the heavyweights, they're like a couple of big bears. They kind of paw at each other, and so that's always great. I like to shoot weightlifting. I was there for a gold medal weightlifting effort, which was also, I think, a world record. And yeah, I love also to shoot table tennis. Hard sport to shoot, think, back and forth, but so fast. And it's
at
hard
that
to
level.
Yeah,
not like me. I can barely get it over the net, but you can try to shoot me one day. That'll be easy. There's not a slow enough shutter speed for that.
So one of the first events, actually it may have been the very first event after the lockdown here that I shot, a sports event, was cage fighting.
Oh my God.
And, it's the first time I've never shot a cage fight before, but it was an interesting thing. I think there were 18 or 19 fights on that evening. And I shot all of them, and I was the only photographer there, so I had, immediate access to everything. But what struck me was, when you had the kind of skinnier guys going at it, there was a lot of like airtime, like they would throw each other around, and they spend a lot of time in the air basically. But as soon as you get the big guys, like the heavyweights, whatever, coming in the ring, there wasn't much happening. They were literally like you said earlier, like two big bears hugging each other, and that was it. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that's not doing it for the action shots for me, but hey, interesting experience.
God, yeah. Joe, with these, like, let's just take skateboarding just as an example there. Do you do much preparation for that sport when you haven't shot it before or you haven't shot it in a long time? So you understand, I guess, the rules of that particular sport and where people are perhaps going to be and the type of things that they're going to be doing?
You do try to do some research. I watched some videos. Everything here at our studio is a team effort. My studio manager, Lynn, has been with me for 32 years. And my wife, Annie, is our director of social media marketing. And she really teamed up with me for the games because she did a lot of preamble research and then started formulating, maps for me. I had a whole folder that we had distances and bus routes from my hotel every day. So I could factor whether I could get only one venue in or two, or maybe even three, depending on the travel time. And the silver lining of pandemic games was that the normal traffic associated with an Olympics was not as bad as it ordinarily would be. So you could possibly segue from place to place. So, and then I would also do my basic captions and I would relay those to Annie back here over the internet. And then she would fine tune the captions and then FTP them to Zuma. So it was really very teamwork oriented. And so Annie did a lot of research. I was watching videos and she was observing trends, and she would send me emails overnight saying, I think you should do this. This is trending. This is going to be big. So-and-so is huge. You should, so it's really kind of a very collaborative effort here at the studio because we were all in. It was, I had been working on the idea of going to the Tokyo Olympics almost since the conclusion of the Rio Games. So, and then it became 5 years instead of 4 years. So we really went after it.
I mean, as far as I remember, the pandemic really hit just before the Tokyo Games were supposed to happen the first time around, wasn't it? It's they got cancelled at a relatively late notice, as far as I remember.
Yeah, they were reluctant to cancel, obvious. I came home in 2020. I came home from Romania on a flight through Amsterdam on March 15th. And that was the last time I was on an airplane until I flew to Tokyo in 2021. So, yeah, they lingered after that. March, April, things just kept getting worse. And they finally gave up, said, no games this year, which was rough. That had to be crushing for a lot of the athletes.
Yeah. I was going to say it's horrendous because I read some stories of athletes who had, they obviously, when after the games were cancelled and they started getting rescheduled, that they got injured and then couldn't take part. I couldn't even begin to imagine how that feels. It's something you work your entire life towards, and you can't go because of cancelled games, and then you can't go because you get injured. It's just shocking. I can't really fathom that in my own head how I would feel about it.
Especially too, I've worked with a lot of Olympians. Even in years I did not do the Olympics, I oftentimes would work with Olympic athletes. And it's really meticulous as they start to ramp up because they want to reach their physical peak at the time of the game. So their workouts are all designed very intricately to keep building. And then all of a sudden it's like getting a blowout on the highway. And all of a sudden your tire just goes and you have to pull over to the side of the road at a dead stop. It's rough. It's very rough for them.
Yeah.
Now, I know that Nikon were testing the Z9 at the Tokyo Games. Did you get your hands on one?
Nope. Shot all D6. Never saw a Z9 while I was there.
So when we spoke to Nikon at the photography show only a few weeks ago, we were sort of hopeful that they would, unravel or unveil it at the show. But unfortunately, we weren't that lucky.
No, it's coming. That's all the rage right now and the rumors. It's coming soon, hopefully. And we'll see what happens.
Now, The other thing that's always intrigued me about what you do, Joe, and this is really for years, is the fact that I know that you for some reason like to climb up really tall buildings.
Yeah, it's kind of fun if you want to get a different view of an urban landscape. And let me just state too, I'm not a climber. I'm not. I don't rock climb on my weekends or anything like that. I'm not a nature photographer by any stretch. But in an urban environment, getting up high sometimes can really be advantageous. You get into a position where very few people ever get a chance to go. So there is a certain uniqueness to that angle and the pictures you're able to produce.
So you're not free running or anything like that, Joe? No?
Free running? What's that?
Is it free running? Have I got? I might have got the name wrong there. Kay, you're more hip than I am. Is that what that is? Free running?
I don't know.
Parkour?
I'm 10 years older than you.
Do they call it parkour?
Yeah.
Oh, parkour. Yeah. No, I'm definitely not a I would break my neck so quickly. But there are these, and again, you're right. I can't pull the name out of my head, but there are some daredevils who have like jumped the fences at night at construction sites and whatnot, and just done videos of themselves just without safety lines or anything like that, just jumping around at all sorts of heights. Again, not me. When I go up, I'm thoroughly, I've been thoroughly vetted, insurance programs, et cetera, permits, all of that. The only really free reign I did have years ago was at the Empire State Building. I had a great relationship with the Empire State Building. He was a true gentleman of New York, Alex Smirnoff, and he was in charge of what they call the mast operations at the top of that building. And he was enough of a presence and smart enough to know that the Empire State Building isn't just a building. It was designed to be photographed. And so I built a relationship with him, and eventually I kind of had carte blanche. I've climbed that tower numerous times and up and around. My name's not on a single piece of paper. I could just climb. So I've been to the very tip of that building, I think 4 times. No more. Unfortunately, Alex is gone. And I wouldn't even start the process at this point, because the amount of paperwork you'd have to drill through to only receive a negative response makes it sort of not worth it.
So did you say you managed to get up to the tip? I can picture the top of the Empire State Building, but I can't articulate exactly which bit I mean. But there's this extra kind of level, isn't there? I guess is maybe a way to describe it. Is that the bit you're talking about?
Yeah, at the very tip of the antenna, there's a red flashing light, and it warns off the aircraft. And I've been up to that light at least 4 or 5 times.
God, I feel nervous just hearing that.
I've only ever made it to the viewing platform, and the cage, but that was high enough for me, I think.
Yeah.
It's a great view of New York. You're right. And the beautiful thing about the Empire State is that you're right in the middle of the island, basically. So north and south are very dramatic views.
It's a very stunning view. I think Nick and myself, we have sort of, pre-planned a trip to New York for a variety of reasons. At some point in the future, when life normalizes again, at some point, it's definitely going to be one of the things to do for sure. Now, Joe, you've completed so many different assignments throughout your career. Anything from shooting press photography in New York City to war zones around the world. What was the most harrowing sort of assignment you've ever done?
I've done a very brief amount of conflict, areas. I never really went out seeking conflict. Let me just establish I'm not a war photographer, and I have tremendous admiration for those photographers who have done it at a high level and repeatedly put themselves at risk to document these kinds of situations. So at Life, I did a few scenarios, with a panoramic camera. It was sort of aftermath kinds of things in Rwanda or Somalia or Afghanistan or Chechnya, places like that. So, those always have their moments, of potential risk, and you go in understanding that, and you try to minimize it as best as possible. And it was not an area of photography that I endeavored in extensively. What is the real key to doing that kind of work is to have boots on the ground for long periods of time. In other words, really develop a set of contacts and resources and thorough knowledge of the area in question so that you can photograph effectively. So I've only done it a couple of times. I was in the north of Ireland back in the day. That was my first real bouncing off of international news. I was on the streets of Belfast when Bobby Sands died in the H blocks. And that was pretty hectic, out there on the streets of Belfast. But I've always lived more comfortably in the realm of my imagination and the idea of doing stories on people and following them through, or a theme or a narrative. I always likened the idea of doing a story at the National Geographic. I always likened the narrative to be like a clothesline, and I would just hang my pictures on it as I would go.
Mm-hmm. That's a way to think about it. I think, I wonder if, did you, if you take those, perhaps the times in, or any of those kind of conflict areas, if you like, have you ever felt unsafe to the point where you thought, is this really worth it?
Sure. I got flown into Somalia from Nairobi. I flew in on a Red Cross plane, and I had made arrangements with a wonderful man, Mohammed, who ran a hotel in downtown Mogadishu called the Sahafi, which is Arabic for journalist. And he would be kind of a resident fixer for journalists who are visiting that very unusual city. And I had made arrangements with him, and the airstrip, it was really just kind of a stretch of sand north of Moog. He said, they'll drop you off there and I'll come get you. So the Red Cross plane dropped me off, and the pilot said, they said something about, there were landmines, that had been planted on some of the airstrips. He wasn't going to hang around. So he spun the plane around and he took off, and that little Red Cross plane just became a dot in the blue sky.
God.
And I sat down on my equipment and there was nobody there. And I thought, this might have been really, really dumb, for me to have done this. But, after an hour or so, maybe a bit more, I saw some dust trails, and it was Mohammed and his crew, came and picked me up and got me safely across the green line and to the Sahafi. And then he kind of worked it out with me about what I needed to do to stay safe and photograph in Mogadishu.
Wow. To have someone on the ground there like that is just, must be comforting to know that you had someone that you could rely on.
Oh, fixers are a wonder and a gift to the photographer. National Geographic had a legendary network of fixers. And, you could plug into these folks. They had a history with the magazine. And if you were going, say, to Moscow or Tokyo, you don't speak the language, you have to have somebody there who's facilitating what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. But landmines? God, I couldn't even begin to imagine getting off a plane, the pilot just taking off and knowing that there's a chance I'm surrounded by landmines right at that moment. Oh, God.
Yeah, it was advisable just to sit down, which is what I did. Photographers, we're good at that. We're good at just like sitting down and kind of like, okay. I always advise folks when I teach, like, if they're street shooting or in a city and they're looking for pictures and things aren't going well, I always advise them, well, just sit down, find an outdoor cafe, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and just do nothing. Sometimes the picture will come to you if you're just there, observing life, so the idea of working hard and chugging around, I got to find a picture, is not really conducive to good street photography. You have to just do a very, very interested and pleasant wander.
Yeah. Or, that sounds very similar to what Moose Peterson told us on this podcast a little while ago, where he said, like, my talent is, I could sit on a rock for 9 hours and just look at a hole in the ground for some critter to come out.
Yeah, no, Moose can do that. He's, we used to teach together, Moose and I, and he really can see, and is patient with the beauty of nature and, letting it come to him. I'm the more impatient sort. I like a subject that talks back to me. I like people. I always used to tease them. I said, I've never met a landscape picture that I couldn't make better by putting a person in front of it, because I'm a people photographer, and Moose and I would have this pleasant, sort of back and forth, kidding each other about things. But yeah, my landscape photography is an art and a craft that I'm not particularly terrific at, enjoy it. I admire it. It's done well, it's phenomenal, but I tend to be more urban, I tend to be, a people photographer, portraiture, stories, features. I always call it a face and a place, a storytelling picture of someone in an environment that helps tell their story, shopkeeper, fisherman, or whatever it might be.
Now, you're also very well known in the world of photography education as the master of flash. How did you develop that relationship with speedlights or artificial lighting originally?
Well, I would debunk the whole master thing. That's, photographers are never a master of anything, because photography is the kind of field that'll just, every time you get a little cocksure of yourself or overconfident, photography itself will rise right up and kick you right in the ass, and so you have to be careful of that. Yeah. I got tuned into speedlights because I had to. My first cover story for the National Geographic the contract was for 26 weeks of work, 26 7-day weeks, wow, half a year. And with the editing, it took a year. And it was called The Sense of Sight, and it ran as a cover in 42 pages. And I was all over the world by myself. And I was flying coach, as we did. And I had a battered Halliburton. And with me, I would throw in the hold of the airplane, keep my cameras on board with me. So I had a duffel with personal stuff, and my tripod would be in there. And then the Halliburton, back in the day, you could lock your equipment case, throw it on the airplane. But a great deal of space in that old Halliburton was occupied by film. Now we have tiny little cards that hold thousands of pictures. I would have 300, 400 rolls of Kodachrome in that Halliburton, and it took up a lot of space. So I had no real extra room, if you would, for lighting. So I got familiar with, because I had to, the idea of using speedlights as a little accent or additional pop or something that would facilitate a scenario that I was involved in. So yeah, it was a necessary learning curve that I had to undertake, when I first started working with speedlights.
So you've written a number of books about speedlights and about lighting, and I think you mentioned at the beginning that you spent the time during lockdown to write a new book.
I did. Yep, it's called The Real Deal: Field Notes from the Life of a Working Photographer, and just there's learning involved, to be sure, lessons to be learned, but they're more experience and life-driven. It's not so much a put the light here book, because at this point in time, there's so much information on YouTube and various sites about where to put the light that if you don't know where to put the light at this point, there's just no hope. So just tune into all that stuff. There's plenty of stuff that'll give you the f-stop and the shutter speed. This is really more about. And my editor and I, we talked about it. It's not, as we discussed, it's not like a super highway for like the answering of a question. Like there's books out there about posing, for instance, something like that. At the end of the book, you can pose someone. You have a good grasp of it. This is not that. This is more of a country road, not so much a super highway. It's scenes from the life of a photographer. And there's also a fair amount of learning in it, where I discuss lighting and how to work a situation and how to adapt. And we were just talking about fixtures. There's a chapter in there about fixers and how you can enlist the assistance of someone. Because I oftentimes get in educational scenarios, at workshops, like, I really want to make my pictures different. And I'm going on this tour. And oftentimes I would my response is, okay, try to carve out time apart from the tour. Find yourself a fixer and spend a day by yourself. Not so much, even though it's wonderful to be part of a tour and it can get you to places, it's not going to result potentially in any sort of unique photography. If you really kind of research a place and say, oh, I'd like to go to this particular farming area or something like that I'm intrigued by, then you can kind of do some research and find yourself someone who's connected enough to bring you there, So I actually have, it's real. I don't know, it's about 350 pages. And it won't be out too soon. We were hoping for Christmas, but it appears now it will, the actual physical book will be available in January. It's looking like, given supply chain issues, which are happening to every industry. The ebook should be out actually pretty soon, within like 2 weeks, I think, is a rough ballpark for the delivery of the ebook.
Will we be able to get a copy of the physical book in Europe, or is it US only at the moment?
No, absolutely.
Great.
The publisher is Rocky Nook, and they have a substantial UK presence. In fact, they, except for this past year, they would routinely go to the photography show in Birmingham, and their book sales were terrific. I always loved the photography show in Birmingham. I really do. People are congenial and passionate, and there's just something about the spirit of that show that's very, very enjoyable. I missed it this past year.
Yeah, we were Nick and myself went this year, and although it was different, it was a little bit smaller, but it was also a lot more personable. I think it was really, and it was really great to meet up with with friends that we hadn't seen in a couple of years, and and we had an opportunity to meet a number of our former guests there in person for the first time ever. Which really was it was a lot of fun.
This is probably a good point to say hi, Tommy.
Yes.
Yeah, listening in your car.
Yeah. Make sure you don't watch the YouTube video in the car. Make sure you listen to the audio version.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Good advice.
There you go. Joe McNally told you. Yeah, but it was fun. I mean, again, it wasn't necessarily a show of the same size. I think even physically it was a little bit smaller. I think it was only 2 halls rather than the usual 3 or 4. So it was physically a little bit smaller, but there were some positive aspects to take away. Like for us, for example, we were able to talk to people. People had a lot more time, and so we created a whole episode at the show, which was really super fun.
That's great. Yeah, it's as I say, it's a very congenial show. I've always enjoyed it.
Cool. Now, you've got a number of workshops in the planning over the next couple of months. Where's the next endeavor leading you to?
Well, right now we have planned with Nikon UK, based in London, 2 days of a lighting and portrait workshop at the Ashridge House, which I have not been to, but looks absolutely magnificent. And just the classic, I think the physical structure dates back to medieval times. Mm-hmm. And magnificent halls and rooms, and staircases, and just a beautiful environment to shoot. And working in conjunction with Nikon UK and Neil Freeman and Richie, wonderful photographers and educators. And that's coming up in the 3rd week of November of this year. And fingers crossed, that all comes together. COVID is always kind of this shadow in the background still, of what we attempt to do. So, and then we have a workshop. Oh, Lord, I'm teaching with my friends Amy Vitale and Tamara Lackey, wonderful photographers, wonderfully talented people. And we're bringing a group to the Amazon basin in Ecuador in February, which is a trip that we have now pushed back for 2 years. But we are going to go this coming February. Ecuador is trending in a very positive direction in terms of COVID, and our entire group is vaccinated, and we feel very positive that we are going. So yeah, and then we have a wonderful workshop that is a first, really. I have a very dear friend, Lisa Politi and Ari Espe. They are partners in life as well as photography. And Lisa is the producer. Ari is a fellow teacher. And we are doing a New York City Christmas lights workshop in December, which should be a lot of fun. And I love the idea of doing a workshop in New York because I've always loved to photograph in the city, and I don't get a chance to do it that much anymore because of schedule and this and that, distance. So getting into the city for 6 straight days and hitting the streets is always, I always get charged up about it. New York is constantly vibrant and fun to photograph.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. I mean, as I said earlier, and Nick and myself, we've been planning on hopping over to New York for a little while. We've had a number of guests over there, and there's a number of challenges I think that we've set ourselves, particularly to do with street photography over in New York City. So that's hopefully that should happen at some point next year, maybe. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Have to cram a couple of weeks there, I think. We've got a lot to do.
That's a resounding yes from Nick there. Yeah, damn it, we're going.
Yeah, I'd go tomorrow.
Well, see, the thing is, 2 years ago, so I have family over in Canada, and so 2 years ago, I was planning to go over to Nova Scotia with my wife and meet up with family, and my plan was to basically level up my landscape photography because. Much like yourself, my landscape photography is not particularly great, and so I thought I'd take this as an opportunity to practice and get some opportunities over there. Then COVID hit. Then we thought, by next year everything's going to be fine. And of course, 2021 travel didn't happen either, and so now I think we're looking at 22.
I mean, inch by inch, we seem to be getting a bit better. So it's going to require patience. I remember coming home on March 15th in 2020 saying, it'll be fine. I'll go to the Olympics and, this will be over in a couple months. They'll get it managed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I remember exactly the same thing. Like by March time, we were thinking, we've got flights booked, for August. It'll be fine by then. It'll be fine, by August, no problem. And then August comes along and I remember, my wife and I looking at each other going like, how silly was that even thinking? I mean, there was no way, by August that anything was going to open up. So Joe, I've seen you, I've seen many videos of yourself on YouTube. And I mean, I certainly have learned a lot from your educational videos on there. And I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers have as well. How did you first get involved in the education side of photography?
Wow. Good question. I a little bit by osmosis, I guess. I was one of the original team leaders at the Eddie Adams workshop. I was a team leader there for 14 years. And, I also got asked by Maine photo workshops. Back in the day, the Maine workshops were kind of a powerful teaching vehicle in the photo industry. And I had to fill in for an instructor that had a conflict. And all of a sudden I was thrown into a week-long workshop for the first time in my life. I was like, But I found I survived. The class enjoyed it. They felt good about the teaching. I enjoyed the camaraderie and the company of photographers. We would, do class, do some shooting, go out, have a beer, talk about it. And so I found it to be convivial and enjoyable. So I, started to, open up a little bit in terms of schedule, in terms of, being available to teach. And the ball kind of took off from there because teaching has become a major part of this industry. Absolutely.
I was going to ask you how you balance your time between, assignments and the educational stuff that you do.
It can be a little bit difficult because, workshops, especially like teaching for National Geographic, which I've done many times, Nat Geo will book you, a year and 2 months out, and so you have this isolated commitment out there in the middle of your calendar for next year. And sometimes that would be kind of like a thing you'd have to navigate around. So yeah, because assignments come up oftentimes at the last minute, and can't do it because, back in the day, it was a softer sort of thing. Travel and all that was a little more flexible, airplane refunds and all of that. But now, if you commit to a workshop, you got to stick to it because people, make plans around it. They buy tickets that are not refundable. They commit, finances to it, et cetera. So it's a big responsibility. If they are looking to come to one of your workshops, you really have to deliver and work very hard to give them a good experience and teach well.
Are there particular aspects that you enjoy teaching more than others, Joe?
Sure. I like, the critiques, I think, are very important. And, I lead the critiques in our classes, and I enjoy the banter and the back and forth, especially if people are, disagree with my assessment of a photograph. There's a good back and forth, and a lot of learning takes place in that process. And critiques are very powerful for a photographer. You need to have another voice in your head. Years ago, as a student, I took Jay Mazel's workshop, his workshops at the bank, which are no longer, but I just really wanted to submit work and get some critiquing going and have another voice, sort of looking at what I was doing and informing me about things I was doing right or wrong. And Jay informed me quite often about, the substantial number of things I was doing wrong. Jay was always direct, in his assessments of your work, and he still would be. He's moved out of the bank now. He's out in Brooklyn, but the bank itself was a formidable experience. His residence down in the Bowery, so that was all part of it.
I don't think you can beat direct feedback, if I'm honest with you. Yeah, it's not for everyone, and I think you find more and more these days that you kind of float around the bit of feedback you're trying to give to tart it up and make it as soft as possible. And nah, I'm not on board with that. I prefer something far more direct. Say, this is great. This is absolutely fantastic. The way you did that. This shocking. What were you thinking? I'd much rather receive that.
Yeah, I have a whole. Well, it's not a whole chapter. There's short stories, in the book that I've written about, and I don't exclude myself from, discussion here. And so there is a chapter or small field note, and it's called. What was I thinking? and that's me in a trash bin, surrounded or filled up with all my useless transparencies, right, looking at them incredulously as to like, how the hell and why the hell did I shoot that? Yeah. Because any photographer worth their salt will admit that they fail probably more frequently than they succeed. And when I define success, I mean, yes, you have to be successful on a regular basis, but there's success, which means you please the client, you shoot a nice picture, but those days produce images that are serviceable, nice, wonderful, good, all that sort of stuff, but not incredibly memorable, perhaps. You do a good job. Hopefully you don't fail on a regular basis, but when you're really striving for a certain level of work, that level of work only comes around every once in a while. Where you intersect with the arc of the job in a really special way, and truly resonant pictures result from that. Memorable pictures that have impact. That's what we all strive for, and we fall short of that a great deal.
I see that with the 2,500 images that I take, and the 50 usable ones out of that baby, and I'm being optimistic with that.
Yeah.
Usually
the editing process, you need an editor in your life. I mean, some photographers are really good editors. I'm very hard on myself. I critique myself pretty severely, and I break things down pretty hard. I had thankfully came through a tradition of really great editors. Larry DeSantis at the UPI, Danny Farrell at the New York Daily News, Bill Douthit down at Geographic, John Dominus, John Loengard, Mel Scott. All these people were legendary editors. And I really got schooled, sometimes quite severely, on my efforts. So I take that forward and try to use that as a barometer for how I've done on a job. Because honestly, as a photographer, you know that when you're out in the field, you know when it's working and when it's not. You can feel it in your gut. And yeah, and your gut's rarely wrong. If you feel like, oh man, this job just didn't work, it's not going to somehow transform itself when you get back to the computer. There's not going to be surprises there, like, oh wow, yeah, this is actually really nice. No, there's just going to be a bad picture seen bigger, and in the aftermath. So you have to really maintain a very strict sort of watchdog aspect in your own head about your own work, because it's easy to get kind of fall in love with your own myth.
Yeah, and it's very often it's a time factor that opens your eyes on that as well. When you look back, especially on social media or something, when you're when you're very easily able to look back at things, at work that you've done 3, 4, 5 years ago, and you realize how what you thought was amazing back then now really doesn't really cut it at all. And it's it's just because you're getting a little bit of objectivity back. And that's an important experience for any creative, no matter whether you're a photographer or a musician or, whatever.
Sure, absolutely.
Joe, do you play an instrument by any chance?
One of the regrets of my life, I do not.
Ah, what a shame. So we're getting a camera shake band together.
Yeah, I'm
We've got lots
afraid
of guitarists. You could sing.
You don't want me to do that. No, that would drive people right out of the pubs.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, we may pop up to your course that you're running here in mid-November, because we're literally just round the corner from where you're holding that workshop.
By all means, by all means.
Yeah, Ashford's house is beautiful, and it's literally like 10 miles away or something.
Yeah.
Again, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed that there's a lot of distressing reports from the UK, but there's also some good reports. So like every place in the world, you gotta balance. There's no such thing anymore as risk-free travel. You have to really balance it and assess it. So,
how have you found air travel since things have opened up again? Do you find it more distressing than before? Just generally, like the act of traveling by plane?
I don't. I mean, it's a little more arduous in that you have to wear a mask, for the whole flight and all of that. But I feel pretty confident on the airlines. They've taken it upon themselves. I think most of the good airlines really take it very seriously and really clean the airplanes. So I feel good about the environment. Albeit limited, because I've only done 2 round trips: New York, Tokyo, New York, New York, LA, New York, since COVID hit. So I don't have any bad experiences to report. But then again, my flying time in the age of COVID has been very limited so far.
That's one of my main concerns. We're we're trying to get back to Germany. I have family in Germany too. So we haven't been able to do that in the last couple of years. So that may be on the cards. But I'm a little bit, I don't know, cautious still at this point, especially because as you mentioned, like the numbers in the UK are not currently looking that great. So, but then again, apparently, and this is what I read in the newspaper this morning. So now our government is saying that we may be looking at the peak right now, and that numbers are supposed to naturally fall off over the next few weeks. That's also possible.
We'll see.
Depends on who you choose to believe, of course. That's
we'll see. I think we're all living our lives like that now. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have come to the end of episode 79 of the Camera Shake podcast with today's guest, Joe McNALLY. Joe, thank you so much for being our guest today. It was an absolute education.
Well, thank you guys. It was a fun conversation. And as I say, I always enjoy the company of photographers and just shooting the breeze about making pictures. It's often fun. And as we say, tall tales will be told.
Absolutely. So hopefully we may be able to meet you in person in a few weeks over at Ashridge House. Let's hope all that comes together. It'd be phenomenal. Now, for all of you, again, just a reminder, if you have been listening to the audio version of this podcast, go right ahead over on YouTube. You can see our beautiful faces in full Technicolor, of course. Whilst you're there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, ring that bell, all of the good stuff that YouTubers usually tell you to do. That would really help us out. However, though, if you are on Apple Podcasts, write us a little review. We'd love that too. That being said, that's episode 79. We'll see you next week.